I think that's what this really comes down to is how do you find those talents and how do you start utilizing them in the service of others? Because I guarantee you, if you can do those two things, and then, as I said, start aligning it with where your ambitions are taking you and your aspirations, it's going to lead you to where you want to be, and you're going to do it with much more fulfillment.
Welcome to the Let Me Save You 25 Years podcast. I am your host, Shawn David Nelson, founder of Lovesack. Today's Shawnism: the quality of your decisions determines the quality of your life. Your life, where you are right now, is nothing more than the sum of all the decisions that you've made heretofore. What you become will be nothing more than the decisions you make today, compounded with those tomorrow, the next day, and every day after that. That's all it is. We are only our decisions, right? We get into it deep with today's guest. We talk about the concept of compounding when it comes to finances, but watch out for the compounding effects of bad decisions. And of course, how to make the good ones. We talk about how you have the choice to be the victim of your circumstances, or you can do something about it, right? You can be a victim, you can do something about it. That's it. Tiny actions can trigger massive outcomes, and why many people fear losses more than they value gains. But it is on the living of life that we find the most satisfaction, and in our deathbeds, the most regret if we don't go live it, which is why I chase the gains and try to push the fear out of my life. We get into what our amazing guest, John R. Miles, calls choice architecture and how to shape that for your life. We get tactical. We get spiritual. You're going to love this podcast. This guy is an expert and worthy of every minute of this podcast. Please dive in. You're going to love it. Today, we have a guest who's mastered the art of turning attention into action and decisions into destiny. He's an author, a globally recognized keynote speaker, and the creator of the award-winning Passion Struck podcast with over 60 million downloads. From serving as a Navy officer to leading in Fortune 50 boardrooms, and now inspiring millions to live purposefully. He has seen firsthand how the quality of your choices shapes the quality of your life. Today, here to unpack why your life isn't defined by what happens to you, but by how you decide to respond. Get ready to learn and how to elevate your choices, because this man lives by the mantra: the life you want starts with the decisions you make today. Please welcome the John R. Miles.
Hey, Shawn, great to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So I can't wait to get into this. Look, without even thinking too hard, when you heard this Shawnism, the quality of your decisions determines the quality of your life, what's the first thing that came to mind?
A pinball, actually.
Okay.
I hear this. I hear people use the phrase, people are living on autopilot all the time. And to me, I understand the concept very well, but I think it's the wrong analogy, because when you're living on autopilot, the pilot is typically, let's hope, putting the plane in the right direction of the final destination. But I don't think that's how most of us are living our lives. I think we are like a pinball in the game of pinball, and we let all the forces nudge us in ways that take us further and further away from the life that we want. And I think we need to become more mindful of learning how to play the game of pinball instead of being played by it.
Wow. I love that. I love that. So how do we, you're the master. How do we do that? Give us let's jump right into it. First tip to mastering playing the pinball game versus being played by it.
Well, I think the first thing is you have to realize that pinball is like life. Pinball and the makers of the game actually have a series of mini games that make up the game. So you have to go through this whole period of analyzing and understanding if you're a pinball player, how the game works. Because if you don't understand the micro games behind the main one, you're never going to be able to perfect it. And the same thing about life. Isn't it really a bunch of games that we fall into? And so you have to really start analyzing what you want out of life and what's holding you back. And one of the metaphors I love to use for this is the voting booth of life metaphor. Every choice that we make, every decision that we take is a vote for the type of person that we become. One vote alone doesn't decide the election, but over time, ballots add up. And it's that culminating effect over time of what's either going to create a waterfall of promise or a tsunami of death.
Wow. Well, a waterfall of promise or a tsunami of death. Those are pretty stark metaphors. I hopefully choose the waterfall, but I like that. We don't just choose the waterfall. We make 1,000 choices to build that waterfall. That's very interesting.
Well, and it's really black and white like that, isn't it? You typically rarely find yourself in the extreme. You're either heading in one direction or the other, and they are very different endpoints, which is why I use those analogies the way I did.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, one thing's for certain, we can't stop the water from moving, right? So I feel like one way or another, we're being, propelled. I like the pinball analogy a lot. One way or another, whether we want to admit it or not, we are in this game. We are going to ricochet off of other people. We are going to ricochet off of the world around us. The world around us is going to be tumultuous and flashing and bright and violent. And but we do get to make our decisions. We do get to vote. We're not just banged around like a pinball unless we allow ourselves, I think, to be banged around. So yeah, that's very interesting. So well, let's get tactical about it. How what advice do you have? This is all about decisions, right? The quality of your decisions determine the quality of your life. What immediate advice do you have out of the gate to people who feel like they need to start making better decisions?
Well, one of the things I always like people to understand is I think too many of us look at these major events that happen in our lives. We get a new job, we get married, um, as the defining events that define us. And what I like people to recognize is that anytime you have a large event like that, there's a transition point between one event to the next. And transition points, I think, are either where you're getting lost or you're staying on track. And like to use the military analogy to this because I was in the military, and when you have a mission that you're going to undertake, typically you don't screw up as much in the moment when you're performing the operation. Now, things happen, you know, they typically do, but you generally over prepare for them so you're ready for those types of things to happen. However, where I have seen more soldiers lose their life and get hurt are during the transition points. You're not on edge like you are or in the flow when you're about ready to do the operation. Your guard's down. You're either on your way to the mission or your way from it. And that's when we let our guard down and things can happen. And I think the same thing happens in life. Uh, it's in these moments where things seem mundane, where you're in the process of building whatever it is that you're aiming for, that it's so easy to fall off track, to do the same thing that we would do on an operation. You get so used to the mundane that things happen and you react in slow motion instead of really being intentional about how you're treating each moment that occurs. And what people don't realize is every single day we have tens of thousands of decisions that we make. And not every one of those is going to be correct. But the more you can think in behavior economics, there's this term called the compounding effect. And you can think of this as like compound interest. Just as compound interest grows wealth, compound decisions either grow or erode our identity and fulfillment. And that's what the transition points are all about.
Yeah, I think that's really powerful. I think that I appreciate this idea of the compounding effect. It's easy to observe how powerful the compounding effect is, right, with money, right? If we see money being invested over a number of years, it can easily double and triple just as a matter of time. I love I love that you bring up this idea of these the let's call it the boring moments of life, the grind in between the big stuff, as perhaps being more impactful to our overall success than those big moments. I agree completely. In fact, let me give you a parallel that's not even the same, but it just struck me as you were talking. I've found when I look back through photos, for instance, I find myself I have 4 kids. It's easy to get nostalgic. It's easy to look back and think of the different homes we've lived in or the different places and things we've done. I'm more interested in the photos of the everyday life, around the kitchen or who knows, just
Yeah.
after work or something, than I am of the vacations at Disneyland or whatever. Yet the vacations or the big moments dominate my photo collection, right? The dance, uh, the dance performances, the tournaments, but it's the life in between that's more interesting. It's where it's the memories I'm more interested in saving. And I think that it's that life in between. It's the everyday grind. I agree. And the decisions we're making or not making. Are we being a pinball or are we playing the pinball game? I mean, that's a very stark difference, right? Being the pinball versus playing the game are very different ways of existing in the universe. And I like your metaphor. And so, for instance, again, even though this is a non sequitur, I've started to try to push myself to take more pictures of the everyday moments as opposed to just the trip to Disneyland. And I think the same kind of focus can be utilized in our uh, personal development lives, right? Like, can we put more focus into our everyday routines, the decisions we're making on a daily, even minute to minute basis, as we do into the big decisions that we think are cataclysmic? I think that's really provocative. So what advice do you have for people looking to do that, for people looking for the kind of discipline that perhaps you learned from your experience in the military or now from your experience coaching and influencing others?
Yeah, earlier today, I was talking to one of the pastors at my church, and we were talking about he's the pastor of the young adult group that we have, and we were going through a lot of the things that 18 to 23, 24 year olds are facing. And I have 2 kids myself that are right around that age. And the thing we were talking about is um, if I come into a group like that and try to give them a presentation completely out of the blue, do you think any of them are going to really lean in or care that much about the message compared to if I start showing up on a weekly basis and I'm there every single Tuesday interacting with the 175 young adults who come every week and developing a personal relationship with them. And during that nurturing of that personal relationship, I'm giving them environmental nudges towards certain decisions without them even realizing it. Meaning, they are much more likely to come to me with a piece of advice where I can nudge them in a positive direction than trying to give them a waterfall of content all at once. And it's those nudges made repeatedly over time where you're consistent in the feedback that you're giving them that is going to resonate more to them than one fell swoop of information download ever will. And it's the same thing that goes with the parenting example that you just gave. Um, your your sons and daughters aren't going to learn from you um, to change the oil one time and have it completely figured out. You're going to have to do that if you're teaching them in this example multiple times how to drain the oil, how to select the right filter for the car, how to change it, the frequency you need to do it, and it's that repetition that grows. And I think that's what we fail to realize is that if you want to impact change, it takes repeated effort and it takes consistent follow through. You can't just think of it as a big bang. You've got to think of it as a series of micro decisions that you're helping either your kids, your employees, someone you're mentoring to better themselves. I hope that helps.
Oh, I love that. I think whether we're talking about change on ourselves or change influenced on others, right? Those ideas of repeated effort and consistent follow through. And look, that's the boring part, right? And that's the hard part. I mean, that's the amazing thing. I think on this podcast, I have had so many super famous people, super big names, and it's easy to look at them and to your point, see these championship moments or these big accomplishments and venerate them for their success in those ways. But the part that is so much harder to articulate, almost impossible, is to somehow bring to life all of the repeated effort and consistent follow through that was enacted in their life to bring them to those big moments that we then get to see, because that's where all the pictures are taken. And so, it has me thinking hard about, and I think anyone listening should be thinking about, what are you doing consistently and engaging in, repetition and consistent follow through in your life, even, like as opposed to just being blown around by every wind, or in the case of the pinball analogy, pushed around by every obstacle or artifact that you kind of ricochet off of in this life. And it is those consistent decisions that will have the compounding effect that will basically determine the outcome of your life, right? And with a little bit of luck sprinkled in there, but or bad luck, good luck or bad luck, which I'm a believer in, actually. But we can't control that. And so the part we have to control is that. So you have a fascinating career history. Why don't you tell everyone about your journey from military leadership into the corporate world and how that's been useful to you?
Yeah, if it's okay, I just want to, since you brought up like sports analogies, I
Yeah,
just wanted to highlight someone because I think came to top of mind to me, and I think because Michigan football right now is been in the news a lot over the past couple
sure.
months and days. Let's talk about Tom Brady for a second. It's easy to look at Tom Brady and to think about the 7 Super Bowl rings that he won. But is that what I really want to talk to Tom Brady about if I had him on a podcast? No. I would want to go back to the University of Michigan and his choice architecture that he ended up using. And I want to use choice architecture on purpose
Okay.
because this was developed by Richard Thaler, Nobel Prize winning behavioral scientist, and Cass Sunstein. Um, but at that point in his life, here he is at the University of Michigan. He's a third or fourth string quarterback, about to possibly get cut from the team.
Yeah.
Never going to realize that he is going to be the starting quarterback. And he has a moment of, if you've heard of him talk about this, of severe doubt where he almost decided he was going to quit football.
Wow.
And instead, he got encouragement from a mentor at the time who really taught him to double down and to think about the choices that he was making. And it went all the way back to what was he eating? How much effort was he putting into preparation? How much was he viewing the tapes and learning from them? How much effort was he putting into the way he was throwing the ball, how he was commanding the team? And Tom came back and made the decision that he was going to start making better choices around all of it. And you see this then play out through the rest of his career. And I've talked to other people on the teams that he's played with, and they say one of the defining things about Tom is that he could go to a high school team and he could turn them into the national, or, into the state champions by the way he coaches and motivates people. You see it in his diet, like how he purposefully abstained from alcohol, ate this clean diet so that he could prolong the career he wanted to have, to the way that he showed up. He was the first person at the practice arena, typically the last person who left. He put in the extra reps. You see this in Steph Curry, Michael Jordan, Larry Bird. I mean, you just keep going down the list. And it's this decision, architecture, choice architecture, like I brought up, that defines the great ones from those who, are playing at a professional level, but don't break through to be Hall of Famers. And so you ask about my career, going from the military to the civilian sector. I think this is a great example of where choices end up leading you to a new destination. So I came out of the military only because my last duty station, I was working on a counter drug task force under a two-star admiral. And I had been recruited during my time there by the FBI, CIA, DEA, NSA. I mean, you name it. I ended up applying to a bunch, getting accepted by a bunch, but ended up, my heart was with the FBI. So went through the whole process, was assigned a class, got out of the military. I'd been out of the military for about a week. I'm supposed to go to Quantico. Literally, Quantico is supposed to start on a Monday. I get a call the Wednesday before from my recruiter. Congress couldn't pass the funding budget. Out of precaution, they ended up recycling our whole class. I thought this was going to be a small detour, turned out to be about a 38, 39-month detour. And I didn't have a backup plan. Who thinks that the FBI is going to cancel your class? But what I learned here is that you have the choice in this situation to be the victim of your circumstances, or you have the choice to do something about it. Now, in that moment, I looked at the fact that I was married. We had a child on the way, so I needed to make money, and I didn't have a plan at that point. So the first choice was I need to come up with a backup plan. Like, how am I going to get employed as quickly as I possibly can? So then I started looking at what are the assets that I have empower me to do. So being a veteran has its advantages and disadvantages, but a lot of employers want a veteran. Being a Naval Academy graduate has its advantages. You've got this, large uh, fraternity that you come from, which not only is the Naval Academy, but it's West Point, the Air Force Academy, Merchant Marines. So realizing that, I went to the Naval Academy Alumni Association and asked for their book of alumnus. At the time, it was like this 5,000 page book because the internet didn't exist and you had to
Wow.
go through. And I went and I started making the choice that for 2 hours of my day, I was going to do handwritten notes because you couldn't email anyone back then. And I was going to just start writing graduates. And about within 3 weeks, that led me to 4 or 5 interviews and ended up with 3 different job offers. And I ended up picking one at Booz Allen. But it was a series of choices that got me there.
Yeah.
But where the military training came into play is, we were trained to be resourceful. We were trained to think our way outside of a box, because if you're in a combat situation and you have to improvise, you need to be quick on your feet and you need to look that there are ways out of this situation no matter what. And that always, it's never a one person situation. So I also use the multiplying effect of reaching out to other people for help, which a lot of us don't want to do. But it all comes down to the choice architecture that I used to make nudges to move myself forward. And I knew every single day that I was making the decision to write those letters, to reach out, it was giving me the optimism that something was going to come as a result to it. I could have sat there and waited. I could have gotten a job at the grocery store or become a waiter or something else, but I didn't want to wait. I wanted to keep propelling my life forward.
Yeah, I love that example. Thank you for sharing that. I think it's striking that you chose to do something with some determination, repetition, follow through, right? You were going to write, hey, look, you had this idea and you went with this idea. You went and got the contacts. You started writing those letters 2 hours every day. And the thing I love about this example is you did not have a clear idea of what the outcome would be or even could be exactly. And that's the part that I think freezes most people is the unknown, right? Our human beings, I talk about this sometimes on this podcast, I believe are often most paralyzed by the unknown, by uncertainty. And yet, the path that you chose to try and dig yourself out of this hole was an uncertain path, but executed, this is the key, executed with great follow through and consistency. And I think it's just a good example of what can come, uh, by following your instincts, because all humans, I think, have instincts. We have an amazing brain, an amazing subconscious that will lead us to solutions that sometimes our consciousness isn't even aware of at some level. And I think we have to have a little bit of faith in that and then pair that with that consistency that you described. And look, in just a few weeks, you had these callbacks, you had real job offers, as opposed to just, necessarily taking, let's call it the easy route of going to become a waiter or some other way to fill in the gap that could have become a major distraction and frankly derailed you from, the career that you deserved with a background like you had. But it didn't come from waiting around. Action beats inaction every time, but also the type of action, right? You could have said, hey, I'm going to go be a waiter immediately, start getting a paycheck, whatever. But you chose a different form of action that you thought was, I think, more commensurate to the outcome that you wanted, right? And I'm only pointing this out for people listening because I think it's worthwhile to connect dots for people who find themselves, maybe in pinball mode sometimes, as we all do.
Well, in the book that's over my right hand shoulder, I wrote about astronaut Wendy Lawrence. And I've known Wendy now since probably right around 1989, 1990.
Okay.
When I met her at the Naval Academy, she was my physics instructor. But the backstory of Wendy is when she was a girl, she saw the Apollo astronauts land on the moon, and she said to herself, I've never seen a woman do this, but I envision myself being an astronaut. So as she was growing up, her dad was an admiral, turned out to be an admiral, and was a fighter pilot. So she got to interact with a lot of the initial Gemini astronauts and astronauts that became Apollo astronauts because
Cool.
they flew with her dad.
Hmm.
But she, even at a young age, started to ask them questions like, if I ever wanted to be an astronaut, what are some of the choices that I need to start making? And, they told her, if you could go in the military, if you could become a pilot, if you could do all these things, you would follow in the same track that many of them had done. So at the time, women weren't allowed at the Naval Academy. It wasn't even a choice that she could make, but she was preparing herself with a series of choices that, even if that wasn't the case, she was still going to attend a school where she could become a pilot and move on with it. As it turns out, her junior year, Congress made the decision that the academies would start bringing females in. And in 1981, she graduated with the class of 81, which was the second class of female graduates.
Hmm.
She then became a pilot, helicopter pilot, and continued to make choices because she knew as a female she had to do it better. So she tried to deploy as much as she could. She made every single choice to make her the most powerful choice she could. And then she started applying for NASA, and she knew that in order to do that, she had to get an advanced degree. So she applied, got into MIT, then chose to become a professor at the academy. And while I was there, got selected, eventually became the first Naval Academy female to fly in space.
Wow.
But what her story tells you is that what she did was a series of choices. She was very deliberate about the decisions that she was making. And it's something that I write about, where you have to really match your value system and the intentional choices that you're making with your short term ambition and your long term aspirations. You get that equation right, it becomes a maximizing element to you. If you don't, it becomes debilitating. In her case, she learned how to maximize those three things to propel her forward. And I think that's where a lot of us go astray is we lose either that compounding effect of compounding our values with our ambitions and then our ambitions with our aspirations.
I love that. And I think it's worthwhile to point out, had her life somehow, good luck, bad luck, dumb luck, uh, somehow worked out in a different way, she still would have wound up with an advanced degree, an amazing career, knowing how to fly helicopters, doing all kinds of things, probably been able to support her family or, play a major role in that. But of course, it did work out that she got to go to space and achieve her highest goals. And that's often how these stories end. It's amazing, right? But it's not amazing. It's almost like math, 1 + 1 + 100 can get you pretty far. If you're willing to, as you say, I love what you said, the ability to maximize our decisions, to balance our short-term ambitions with our long-term aspirations, but you got to have that long-term aspiration, right? And so identifying that early and again living to it, like I think of her and I think, what if she had changed her mind? What if at some point she just lost interest in outer space? Well, once again, she would have ended up with all kinds of capabilities, an advanced degree, and probably the ability to take her career any way she wanted it to go, even if she changed her mind along the way. And so I think that that's a worthy way to live, because I think some people are sometimes stymied by the fact they don't know what they want long term. Maybe they can't necessarily fathom it, or they're worried maybe that they feel if they decide this or that they might regret that decision. But I think it almost doesn't matter. Pick something and go for it, and see where life takes you.
Can I paint the picture of the opposite of Wendy?
Yeah, please do.
So I want to go back to that analogy of the pinball. But I want to reinforce it with a quote by Henry David Thoreau, who said, "The mass of men live in quiet desperation." And I'm going to add something to that quote. The mass of men live in quiet desperation because they stop believing their choices matter. That is the very definition of what Marty Seligman, University of Pennsylvania, termed as learned helplessness. And that is reframing your life as if you don't, as if you're choiceless. And my thought is life should be choiceful, not choiceless. And I think that's exactly what Thoreau was talking about here is so many people end up in this point where they've lost their purpose, they've lost their meaning, they don't have passion anymore, and they just quietly go through life bouncing off everything that's around them instead of taking it by the reins and realizing that no matter what age, what point in life, no matter how dismal it may seem, you still have the power to believe in the choices that you're making. Now, you could be hit with rock bottom. I had this guy on the podcast, Nate Duke. I mean, this guy comes out of college, is an entrepreneur, hitting it big, more money, more choices than he's ever had, but makes the choice to get into drugs
Mm.
and alcohol abuse. He starts making a ton of terrible choices, including stealing a car where he gets stopped in another state. So now we have interstate crime involved and he gets thrown in jail. And I remember in our discussion, I will never forget what he told me. He's like, people always told him, Nate, you will never change. But the very advantage that you have if you're at rock bottom and people don't think you can change is that you get to build your life back brick by brick or decision by decision. You can take it any way that you want it. And
Mm.
I think that that is so important for people to understand is that you have control no matter how bad it seems. But too many of us are just sitting in this period of quiet desperation, unhappy, unfulfilled. But what are we doing about it?
Yeah. I love how simply you put it earlier. Am I going to be a victim or am I going to do something about it? Yeah, a Shawnism from my book, my own mom, when I was faced at my low point in life, Lovesac found itself in a complete bankruptcy turnaround. I mean, this was like had been my entire, obviously, focus of my life through my 20s, and I find myself at rock bottom, contemplating a do-over, start over, complete. Do I leave the company? I've caused all these problems. People hate me. I've got a bad reputation. All these things that come in our lowest points. And my mom, put it very simply. Well, you can either quit or keep going. And I think, but I think to give that a little more direction, I love how you put it earlier on this podcast, right? Quitting's one thing, keeping going. Okay. So we keep going, but doing what? And I love how you articulated, um, doing things repeatedly, making choices that we can stick with and have and follow through on a repeated basis over time. And I think that's a great place for people to start. What are some choices that I can make on a daily basis and repeat them for, let's say, an indeterminate period of time, and begin to reap the benefits of the compounding nature of those choices. Because sometimes I think people do get stuck, or they find themselves, as you described, in a really terrible place, or just in a place with no direction. And to shift, to the broader picture, you talk a lot about purpose. I talk a lot about purpose. It's what animates us all at Lovesac. We rally around our purpose statement. In fact, I'm doing a workshop this week inside my own company about knowing yourself and knowing your purpose and how we can get there. What do you have to say about how someone can tap into, discover, articulate their purpose? A purpose that can animate them, a purpose that can give them that long-term direction that's necessary to pair with these maybe daily compounding decisions that lead to the kind of success you've been describing.
Well, the first thing I will say to anyone is, I mean, this is not an easy thing to do. I mean, the reason I'm here talking to you, Shawn, and talking to this audience is because I think we are best positioned to serve the person we once were. And there was a point in my career where I had gotten listless. I had achieved every single thing that I had put my mind to achieve. I had gone from military to consulting to Big Four consulting partner to then
Hmm.
I want to be a chief information security officer to now I want to become the lead of application development. Now I want to become the chief data officer. Now I want to become the CIO. And I was CIO of a Fortune 50 company. It doesn't get much bigger than that.
Well,
But at that point, I was absolutely miserable because I was doing it all for the wrong reasons, for one, but I had become so, I guess, adrift from what my life was supposed to do and what was giving it meaning that I was that very person that I talk about where I had become the person who was sitting in the passenger seat of my own life instead of grabbing the wheel. And I think that that is the most difficult chasm to cross when you find yourself there, because it's easy to sit in that passenger seat. It takes a lot more guts to grab the wheel. I mean, just go to Captain Sully Sullivan. You know, that plane gets hit by the birds, co-pilot's flying it. What's he decide to do? He grabs the wheel. If he hadn't grabbed the wheel, probably a completely different outcome.
Hmm.
If you don't take the wheel, probably a completely different type of outcome. So what I think you need to do if you find yourself in this gray area is you've got to start playing around with different things. You've got to sometimes go back to your childhood to figure out what really lights you up. And what I have found is a way to go back to your childhood is start going back and thinking about the things that you enjoyed as a kid. You know, what
Mhm.
sports did you play? What activities did you do? Maybe you were a dancer. Maybe you loved to read. Maybe you loved to tell jokes. And I think you have to go through a period of time where you start experimenting with yourself and you go through these different activities and figure out what's bringing you joy, what's
Yeah.
bringing you empowerment. You know, volunteer for a nonprofit, volunteer at your church. It's those types of things where you start seeing how you show up in different settings. And I think it's by doing that that you end up getting back in touch with your own inherent talents. And there's this interesting interview I did. His name was, I think it was Andreas Widmer, and he's now the head of the business school at the American Catholic University. But this guy, 19 years old, completely passionless, has no direction in his life. He is born and raised in Switzerland, makes the decision to become a Swiss Guard, never thinks he's going to get selected. 18 months later, he is guarding Pope John Paul II.
Hmm.
And I remember him telling me this situation where you think of the Pope, billion Catholics out there, pretty busy person, yet he would spend alone time with all the people who were around him. Um, he told me that when he was in the Pope's presence, it was like the rest of the world faded away, and you were the only thing at that moment that mattered to him. And he could sense that Andreas was really struggling, and he said, you know, that the purpose for you being here on Earth is that you have a unique set of gifts that only you have been given, and your goal on Earth is to maximize those gifts in the service of others. And I think that's what this really comes down to is how do you find what how do you find those talents and how do you start utilizing them in the service of others? Because I guarantee you, if you can do those two things, and then as I said, start aligning it with where your ambitions are taking you and your aspirations, it's going to lead you to where you want to be and you're going to do it with much more fulfillment. That's exactly what happened to me.
I think that's beautiful and fantastic advice. You know, a few things from what you just said that I want to call out for anyone listening. People often mistake their purpose or whatever they're, you know, told to set up as their ambition and out there as something like a title or a number, you know, a position. And I think it sounds like you kind of fell into that trap and you achieved it. And when you got there, like so many do, you experienced some degree of emptiness or whatever it was that you experienced that was unsatisfying. And it's not the same. You know, the one thing we do at Lovesac is because I'm really big on this stuff, you know, we call it our strategic guide where we capture and articulate and reverence our purpose and our mission. We separate these things, you know, and the purpose is bigger. So our purpose at Lovesac, right, to inspire humankind to buy better stuff, so they can buy less stuff, which again is a weird thing for a company that sells stuff to say. But it's exciting for us because if you understand our products, that's what's amazing. You can keep them for the rest of your life. You can add to them and grow. It's just given us a whole, not just, you know, exciting point of view, but it's given us a strategy. That's how we develop product. That's how we market our product, right? We didn't have that when we started at all. We made big bean bags. People liked them. So it took us a long time to kind of, to your point, play around, observe ourselves. I'm talking about Lovesac, in the wild, and really tap into what it was that was special and unique about us. What are those gifts that we have that we can then maximize in the service of others? To use Lovesac as a metaphor. Well, that's very different than, we want to build a giant brand. We want to build a Nike. Well, that's why we separate those. We both are true. We want Lovesac to become like a Nike, like an Apple, like a legendary brand. But that's a business outcome. And we separate that from our purpose. And it's still true. And both can be true. But we look at those very differently. And that's my point for anyone listening is as you're noodling around, playing your way to discovering your purpose. And if we had more time, I could, talk about my point of view on how to get there is very similar to yours, actually. Right. And observing, where are you the happiest, but getting beyond the activity to the underlying motivation. Right. And I think that's what you were poking at as you described that.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Can I just give an analogy?
Yeah.
I think if anyone plays chess, this is a very good analogy for what we're discussing here. If you play chess, it's a whole game that's built on making micro decisions. The micro moves that you're making look small at the moment. You're moving a pawn or something else. But what they're doing as you're playing it is you're setting up the checkmate. I mean, isn't that the same thing we do in life? It's like the domino effect. A single 2-inch domino can topple one that's 3 foot tall based on the fact that tiny actions trigger massive outcomes. But you can't focus on the output. You got to focus on the inputs. And that's where so many people get it wrong. It's why I was talking at the beginning about the transition points in life, because that's where the inputs happen.
Yeah.
It doesn't happen when you topple the 3 foot tall domino. It happens when you launch the very first one, because that's where you have the most gravity force pushing against you in the opposite direction. But the more of those dominoes that topple, you start switching the momentum the other way.
I love it. And I think it's worth noting, it's probably true that for most people, we are in transition points more often than we are in these pivotal moments in our life. And I think it's important that we don't let those slip by, and that we're very conscious about the decisions we're either making or allowing to be unmade through our own apathy. And we can start small, whether it's wake up a little earlier, whether it's do some push-ups in the morning, whether it's an entire morning routine, whether it's spending time like you did 2 hours a day, right? Sending handwritten notes, or 2 hours a day, by the way, meditating on your higher purpose if you haven't nailed that down, which I have, by the way, spent, just for anyone listening, I have tried to do the work to identify that for myself, which I try to live up to, just like I have for Lovesac. And these things take time. Meanwhile, I'm running a company. We got to meet plan. We got to make sales this week. We got to make sales for the quarter. Where do you find the time? I wish I had a better answer for that, but you make the time. You work in the seams and cracks. You go the extra long hours. You do what's necessary to take the time to identify these things, because, that's what's going to put you on the path. So when those pivotal moments come, even that 2-inch domino has the momentum to topple the big one. I love that. So I want to ask you this, because I read about it. Can you tell us about the moment that changed your life forever in 2017? Where you came home early and came face to face with an armed intruder. Can you expound on that?
Yeah, I mean, this was just. I mean, this is a great example of you never know what you're going to walk into.
Hmm.
So, I mean, it was just a very typical day. Got up, got my daughter ready for school, dropped her off at school, I was going to Orange Theory at the time. And this specific day, as fate would have it, Orange Theory had some type of loose circuit in their air conditioning system, which caused the smoke alarm to go off and the fire department to come. And so happened just at the beginning of class. So I went home probably 45 minutes earlier than I typically would have. What I didn't realize at the time was that there was a perpetrator who had been canvassing me, which is why you should never do the same habitual things every single day and you should mix it up.
Hmm.
But he had been following me in my whereabouts, and he knew that I typically would go to the gym around this time of day, and there would be a period of an hour to an hour and a half where I would be gone. Um, and so this day I came home early and walked in the house and could sense something just wasn't right. You know, you kind of get that spider sense, and as I was calling out, "Is there anyone in the house?" No one answers. And as I was going up our staircase, and it was one of those staircases that has like a 90-degree bend in it, and I turned the corner, just as I was approaching the turn, I started to hear some loud breathing, and I knew obviously something was up, but my momentum was already carrying me forward. And as I turned the curve, I'm staring at, you know, I, someone holding a gun in their hand, pointing it at me, and
Wow.
then you have a split second, which in that split second, it's kind of like being in combat. It feels like eternity, but you've got a decision that you have to make, and you're kind of you're weighing the decision framework that you're looking at. I could have charged the stairs, and I would have had to go up 8 or 9 more stairs with him having the higher position, or I figure out a way to evade. And in this case, I chose that it was better to live another day than it was to charge the hill, because I was probably going to get severely injured. And so that's what ended up happening is I was able to evade him, went out the back door. He ended up going out the front,
Wow.
and um, a- and I think stress and trauma hits us all in different ways. I mean, for
Yeah.
me, I'm a person who has to process these things, so it doesn't necessarily hit me right off the bat. It typically, for me, takes a period of time before it kind of catches up to me. But in my case, not only did that stress and trauma of that moment hit me, but I'd been suppressing a lot of trauma that had faced me before, and so I had this compounding effect where it kind of unearthed all that other stuff. And then in the process of that, within the same week, my best friend jumped off the Skyway Bridge here and committed suicide. And
Oh, wow.
so I had this major unraveling, which
Mm.
was a huge wake up call that for me got me out of that quiet desperation that I had found myself in at that moment, and got me to wake up and decide I can either sit here in purgatory or I can do something about it.
Wow. Wow. Well, you know, it's a you're here you are again faced with the same decision, right? I can be a victim or I can do something about it. And I think that's such a great takeaway for anyone listening. And you know, fantastic words of advice from someone who sounds like he's been at the top, at the bottom, and everywhere in between, and found a way to turn it into actionable advice for everyone listening. What in the spirit of my book and the whole mantra, "Let me save you 25 years." What's one piece of advice you might give someone, uh, or yourself, right, earlier on in your life that you can leave people with that you think could maybe save them a chunk off their own 25-year journey and shortcut some of the things you've had to learn the hard way?
So there's this um, psychologist named Tori Higgins who created something called self discrepancy theory. And this is where most of us have a misalignment between our actual self, like who we are in the present moment, the ought self, which is who we think we should be, like what society, our parents, other people are telling us we should be, and our ideal self, which is who we absolutely could become if we fulfill our greatest aspirations. And There's been a lot of work on this, whether you look at palliative care, like the work of Bronnie Ware, who wrote The Five Regrets of the Dying, or you go into the work of Cornell University, where Tom Gilovich, another psychologist, studied people in their third trimester and found that 76% of them all end up with the same major regret in life. And that is, people fear losses more than they value gains. And ironically, the greatest loss that we can possibly have is the unlived life. And that's what 76% of people at their deathbed regret. So, what I want people to realize here is the greatest regret isn't the typos in the chapters we wrote, it's the chapters that we never even tried to write in the first place. And so, the most important thing that you can do is don't focus on your past, whatever age you are, focus on where you're going. Don't focus on what's behind you, focus on where you're going, because no matter how long you're here and you're breathing, you can still go an additional level forward in your desire to be something better than you are now. And don't feel like you ever have to, stop believing that you can do it. It's just a matter of your intentions being followed up with actions and then aligning them, like I've been talking about, with where you want to go in life. And if you follow that magic equation by taking deliberate action and finding ways to get intrinsic motivation, I swear to you, you will move from where you feel stuck in life and not end up with the greatest regret.
And as I try and tell my kids all the time, just start now. I want to just echo one thing you said on this podcast that I think has to stick with everyone. You are blessed with skills and abilities and gifts that are unique to you. And you are here on this earth to maximize those gifts in the service of others. That is my favorite quote from the amazing John R. Miles. Thank you so much, John. And for everyone listening, you can follow John on Twitter at John, John _R Miles, on Instagram at John _R Miles. You can check out his podcast and his book, Passion Struck. It's out on all platforms and on YouTube. And in a few weeks, definitely pre-order a copy of John's children's book that's dropping, You Matter Luma, which will be releasing in early December. I will be getting a copy for my kids, for my family, for sure. Thank you so much to the multifaceted military medal winner, the wizard of finding out why you matter, the professor of passion struck himself, John R. Miles.
And it was such an honor. Thank you so much for having me. It's always such an honor to be able to talk to another podcaster's audience. So thank you for giving me that honor.
Absolutely. And for everyone listening, remember, your life isn't defined by what happens to you, but by every choice you make in response. So choose intentionally, act decisively, and own the story you are creating. Go live your life. This just might save you a chunk off your own 25-year journey. Thanks so much.
Once a year to take my friends away should not be the budget for your bike across America.
TikTok has become an aggregator for some of the dumbest human actions.
When I won that million, I was $2 million in debt, barely hanging on.